In the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. So who were these guys in Matthew? If you look at the text closely, you see that it does not say 3, and it does not say kings. It says wise men. And the wise men actually is a little fiddling that the English translators have done because they were uncomfortable with the original. The original word is magi, which is plural for magus. It's the word that magic comes from in our language, but it means something much bigger than magician. One of the hymns calls them sages, and I like that word best. I don't think we quite have magi today. We have magicians, and they're wonderful, but that's not what these fellows were. Now, they probably were men. I'll keep with that one. But there was a particular group in the ancient Near East from hundreds of years before Jesus who called themselves magi. We would call them astrologers, but that doesn't do it justice because in their time, they didn't make a distinction between astronomy, which we study in school, which is the mapping and measuring of the stars, and astrology, which is trying to predict human events based on the movement of the stars. They didn't see a difference there. So these were scholars. They were a professional class. One word for them would be scientists, frankly. They were the scientists of their day. Magi. And they came to see Jesus following a star. Where did they come from? We don't know. But there are two trains of thought about this, and you can get lost in Google this afternoon if you want to pursue this further. It's a very pleasant rabbit hole to go through. Very, very pleasant. Most people right now, or at least half, say, well, they came from Babylon. Babylon was nearby. It's to the east, and Matthew just says they came from the east. Babylon was one of the more advanced scientific cultures at the time. And so for the astronomy, star mapping end of it, it would make sense that they had come from Babylon. And you'll remember that the Israelites had been taken into exile in Babylon. There had been a lot of, shall we say, cultural exchange between the Babylonians and the Jews. And so it seems like it's a simple matter that they would have come. They would have had access to the Jewish scriptures and the prophecies about this star. So they could have come from Babylon. More interesting possibility, northern Persia. Northern Persia. Modern day Iran. Now this is interesting. One, because it would have been a much longer journey, and two, because of the kind of people they would have been had they come from northern Persia. If they'd come from northern Persia, according to my sources, now I'm sort of geographically challenged, so I took this at face value. They would have crossed a mountain range, 2 rivers, and 2 deserts to get to Bethlehem. That's a long journey that they would have made. They would have probably come by camel, yes, although from Babylon they probably would have done that as well. It's quite an expedition. But even more interesting, if they come from northern Persia, they might have been priests of the Zoroastrian sect, which was a kind of a ancient sect that studied many religious texts, including Judaism, that also was looking for a Messiah. And you might say they were just more open to the East. Whatever was coming from the East, the people in northern Persia would have been aware of it. If you go online, you can find mosaic pictures from the cathedral in Ravenna of these Persian magi with the Empress Theodora. So some people think they were Persian magi. who had come. Now, as fantastic as all this sounds, this is actually historically credible. Historically credible. There are two ancient records of magi traveling into Israel or into the region from the east. Pliny, the Roman historian, has magi coming to visit the Emperor Nero, a whole procession of them coming to pay tribute to the Emperor Nero. And there's a record in Josephus, the historian, that in 10 BC, magi came to visit Herod. Yes, this Herod. So there is a historical record of a visit from magi, scholars, scientists, to the court of Herod, sometime within a few years of when we believe Jesus to have been born. So it's believable, if it's not verifiable, that the Magi came. The Magi came. Now, if we start with that, and then you can sort of see the church working with this story over the years as tradition begins to layer. By the 6th century, we're thinking of them as kings rather than the Magi. Now, there are two reasons, possibly, for this. One is that the church became uncomfortable associating itself with the Magi. Because of their openness to the East, they became associated with the Christian sect that was known as Gnostic. Some of you have read some of the Gnostic Gospels and pursued some of that teaching and know that the church at a certain point branded them as heretics, but they had a lot of really interesting stuff going on, including a special kind of respect for the inner life and for intuition and for spiritual knowledge. Gnostic just means gnosis, or knowledge. There was a special kind of knowledge that was being passed on. And the church became more and more uncomfortable with that as we start to begin to see a kind of a cleavage between the East and the West. The church kind of turns its back on the East toward the West, toward Rome. And they're setting aside that Gnostic business. So they don't really want to have magi associated with Jesus, right? The other reason is as the church began to claim that Jesus was Lord of Lords and King of Kings, it made sense that kings would bring him tribute. Now, somewhere in the middle, there's maybe safe ground that at the very least they were people of means. Poor people don't go on expeditions. Poor people tend not to be able to go on pilgrimage. It takes a lot. There couldn't have just been 3 men by themselves. That's impossible. They needed camels, they needed provisions, they needed guidance, they might have needed instruments to chart the stars. That you need stuff to do this. So at the very least, they were people of means, maybe tribal kings, maybe king with a small k. They were affluent. Let's put it that way. They were affluent and they were educated. And they give us this lovely model for those of us who are also on our kind of expedition into truth, who are also looking for the live presence, the living God. Those of us who are inquiring and seeking, these could be our patron saints. Why? Because they use what they have. They have a lot, and they use what they have. Think about it. Even if you just use this as a metaphor, they had access to maps. They had access to history. They could read. They could study. They were welcome in the courts of kings, so they had access to consultants, right? They had to study to make this journey. They had to plan. They also had to watch for the unknown. And finally, they had to listen for a source of wisdom outside themselves. Because remember how the story ends. The star guides them to the child, but an angel leads them home. After they find the Christ child, they are warned in a dream to go back by another way, Because, of course, Herod, if he finds this child, will do away with him. Just a historical note, this is Herod Antipas, the son of Herod the Great, whose claim to the throne or the title King of the Jews is a little shaky. The Roman Senate appointed his father. So from the standpoint of a faithful, law-abiding Jew, he wasn't fairly chosen, right? He's not a king the Jewish people love. And if somebody can come and make a claim that they are scripturally foretold as king of the Jews, in that special blend of church and state, if you will, or synagogue and state, anybody with that claim, with that messianic claim, has a stronger claim to the throne than he does. So he's not going to be good. He's not going to pay homage to this king. He's going to kill him. That's the plan that's embedded in this, and it's why the angel, in a dream, sends the Magi home another way. One of my favorite images of these fellows is, I've only seen it in photographs, obviously, but it's at a cathedral in southern France, the Cathedral of Saint-Lazare in Autun. And there's a series of carvings, sculptured carvings of the Magi. And this one, called The Dream of the Magi, is the three kings asleep. They're lying side by side under a great round cover with their crowns on. And one of them has his bare arm out over the cover, and the other two are completely tucked up to their chins. Now, two of them are sound asleep, but the one with his arm over the covers, his eyes are popped open, wide awake. And even in the black and white photograph, he looks terrified. His eyes are wide open. Why? Because there's an angel with one finger touching one finger of his hand and the other arm pointing to the star that's just above his head. He's wide awake now because the dream has awakened him. Now, it's interesting because the star's there, you think, well, is this a dream and an angel guiding them to the Christ child? Or is this a dream and an angel protecting them on their way home, or protecting the Christ child so that they don't lead Herod to him? But the guidance is there. And it wasn't in the maps, right? And it wasn't in the consultation. And it wasn't in the scriptural references that they had seen before. This was knowledge, this was wisdom their study could not bring them. So what does this say to us? The shepherds, all right, they get the angel chorus, they get this equivalent of fireworks in the sky, they drop everything, they run, they drop everything because they don't own anything. They run to the manger. But there's another way. There's another way, this threefold way, for those who have been given much, like the Magi. Use what we have. Use what we have. If we have books, if we have maps, if we have science, if we have charts, we have access to research, study up. There's a tendency in religion to hide our eyes, to turn away from conflicting information or from data that makes us doubt our faith. This story says, no, bring all the information in. Because in the end, the picture will be broad enough and vast enough to encompass it all, and you will be so much happier then. So we don't box God in. We don't protect him from our questions. We don't protect him from science or from atheist friends who badger us at parties. We don't protect him. We bring the data in, we study up. We also pay attention to our experience. Remember that the Magi consulted in the courts of Herod. They asked questions. They drew upon the knowledge of their community. They, as Barth would have it, read the newspaper. Karl Barth said you should have the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other. You keep your eyes open to current events and life that's going on in the world, trusting that somehow all of this is going to work together. But most important, we listen for the angel. the angel, the dream, the spark of intuition, that information from, as Mr. Rogers used to call it, someplace else, capital S, capital E, that elbow nudge from someplace else that simply says, there, now. And that's it. They were drawn into the live presence of the living God. They steadily, steadfastly, over many years, over difficult terrain, followed a star, and they found him. May God give us the courage to take into account all that we are told and learn and know in the world, and trust that our God is as infinite as the sky and big enough to embrace it all, and yet wise enough to reveal himself in a way that we can see. To those who have been given much, there is a way. Use it. Amen.